Chase Thomas podcast. My nephew needs me to record. See, I already hate it. I hate it.
All right, hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Chase Thomas Podcast, where I'm still the aforementioned Chase Thomas, coming to you live from Knoxville, Tennessee, everything School HQ, even though the man on the other side of this very podcast might not agree with everything School HQ, but we say it. We mean it each and every day. Covers VandySports. He's on the radio. You know him all over the place here in Tennessee. It's Billy Derrick. Billy, good afternoon, sir. How are you?
Good, Chase. I'm doing great. Like I said earlier before we got on, I've loved the professional platform you've built here. I love the graphics. I love everything you've been doing here. So glad to hop on and potentially vent about Vanderbilt basketball. We'll see what we'll get into.
Well, venting is good. Venting is healthy. Venting is fun. Tennessee, I thought this would be really apt based on what the last weekend with Tennessee and Vanderbilt squaring off, and it was obviously not the most competitive basketball game you'll see in the SEC. But I just wanted to get from your perspective, because I'm on the outside. I'm reading VandySports. I'm reading different pieces, listen to podcasts of what actually happened to Vanderbilt basketball. And there was obviously all the momentum of the tournament, and you wondered if they were going to build off last year. And there was just like growing optimism, I think, somewhat in terms of if Stackhouse turned the corner in Nashville. And obviously this year has not gone that way at all for Vanderbilt. But I'm not plugged in like you, Billy. So my first thing to you, did you expect this when you were doing preview and you were looking at the roster, you're looking at who they were getting back, you're looking at who they were losing? Did you anticipate this kind of free fall, or did you think that this is still just way too much versus what I had coming in?
I did not expect this kind of free fall.
Okay.
Coming into this season, year 5 of the Stackhouse era. And if you go back and remember when he was hired, he replaced Bryce Drew, who had gone 0-18 in the conference. And you can't, you're not going to keep a coach that goes 0-18. So they made that decision. Malcolm Turner actually made that decision, who was Vanderbilt's AD for about a year. And then Candace Lee replaced him. Of course, she's been in office, I guess you could say, since then. They had made the decision. Well, she actually didn't make the decision. Malcolm Turner made the decision to bring in Jerry Stackhouse. And then shortly thereafter, Malcolm Turner was relieved. So there was a lot going on while Stackhouse was hired. And I think in the moment, there were a lot of people that doubted it, that said, I don't know about this. I don't know that this could work. He's never had SEC coaching experience, never had even college coaching experience. He was, he won a G League title, had assistant coaching experience in the NBA. Obviously was a great player, but it had its detractors. Me, on the other hand, I had some hope because I thought he would be able to really recruit, kind of the Deion Sanders effect. I thought he was going to be able to potentially, attract young players. And, he did, but just not enough. Like he was able to develop a guy like a Tyron Lawrence, Jordan Wright. He improved players, but he just didn't do enough of it. And there wasn't enough player retention. So that's kind of where it started off. And I don't think it got started off on the right foot. I mean, replacing a coach that went 0-18 is not easy for anybody. And Stack had to do that. So I almost count this as his 4th year. I mean, COVID was, coming out of COVID, and then that 0-18 season obviously was brutal. But he got better. Like the trajectory was there. A lot of people thought they should have made the tournament last year. The way they were playing, I thought, they were one of the hottest teams in the country, but they had some early season bad losses. They lost to Grambling. And I think that is what has gotten him and his staff in trouble, is that they haven't really valued the importance of those non-conference games. And just about every year, Chase, in the Stackhouse era, that has hurt them. So kind of a long story short, before this season, no, I didn't think it would be this bad. But there was part of me that thought, going into a season, you've probably done this with football or basketball or whatever, where you got high expectations, but in the back of your mind, there is that scenario where maybe it goes downhill. For example, potentially the Butch Jones era, maybe that last year he was there. You still had some hope and excitement, but there's always that, worst case scenario, DEFCON 5 of, okay, this could go really wrong if you have injuries. And they did have an injury. They had to suspend a player from the team. And so they had a lot go wrong early that they really couldn't have. The margin for error was already really small. But no, I did not expect it to be this bad. And now that it has gotten this bad, it feels like the conversation has shifted from if there's going to be a move to when. When is this going to happen? And the rumblings have heated up, as I'm sure you can tell.
I with my buddy Will Warren of Stats by Will .substack.com, one of the best college basketball writers going.
I love that. And Twitter. Yeah.
He's great. And Will is someone who I've always joked about is like, there's some people who are just like meant to give bad news, where it's like anything coming from Will that's very witty, it's snarky. It's just really funny to me, because I'm just like, if anyone else, the messaging came out, it was just like, man, it's brutal. Will can say brutal things about college basketball hoops in the funniest way, the nicest way possible. But we were like joked about, because like Vandy Twitter is not obviously hiding the fact that they are thinking about and hearing rumblings about who might follow Stackhouse. But again, a move hasn't been made. I think Richard G. West got some folks this week, if I recall, on Jerry Stackhouse's job. So I'm amazed that that's still happening in February of 2024. But that account lives on somehow, day in, day out. But I think it's interesting because, like you said, year 4, now it's a win conversation. Is there anything Stackhouse can do down the stretch here to change minds? Is there part of, like, I think it was it Dennis Felton at Georgia years ago? I don't know if you remember Dennis Felton at Georgia, where he has that SEC run in Atlanta, and then they end up giving him another year and it doesn't get better, and they're just behind. Like, they just talked themselves into Felton because of that late season tourney run, and they were like, oh, maybe he has turned the corner. All right, we were going to move on, but let's not do it. Or do you think no matter what here, it's just probably both sides are parting ways?
I really do believe, and again, I can't really, I don't have enough to substantiate it yet. There's so much being said that I'm sure you know this with coaching changes, that you can't run with anything too early. And you know, fans do, and fans will, as fans, you know, do that. But yeah, me personally, I don't think there's anything him and his staff can do to kind of save their shoes. Like, they're going to have a bottom 4 seed in the tournament, so they'll be playing on that Wednesday night. And I just don't think they have the talent. Like, it'd be different if they had the talent, if I thought they had the talent to do that. You know, but they just don't. They've got Ezra Manjon, who I think is a really good player. Tyron Lawrence is, you know, he would, I don't know that he'd start in a lot of SEC schools, but I mean, he would play. They got a decent post player in Ben Allen Lubin. I mean, you saw when Tennessee played at Memorial that first half, Stackhouse had his team ready and they competed, but Dalton Knecht just went off. And that's what, when you have a star player against Vanderbilt like that, there's no stopping, you know, like there's teams they just don't match up with. Kentucky, Tennessee, Alabama, Auburn, and a lot of teams don't match up with them, but I just don't see the talent. And if I did, it'd be different. I said, I would say, okay, maybe they can, maybe if they get hot here down the stretch, that points to something late this season and they can turn it into momentum for next season. But that's really never been the case. Like last year, as you said earlier, Chase, at the top, you know, I think the perception overall was that, okay, you had a good year. You thought you should have made the tournament. You know, now year 5, this is the year. This is the year you break through. Goalposts can't change, right? And I think that has happened here. You know, whether it's, you know, people defending Stackhouse and saying, you know, all these excuses about COVID and players getting hurt, players leaving for the draft, and those don't apply anymore, and they can't really apply. So yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think if you asked me that 2 weeks ago, I would have said maybe, you know, just because of they usually play hard for him. But now, especially in Knoxville, I mean, that's a game where you kind of think to yourself, okay, did something happen before this game? Was there a conversation between Stackhouse and the administration before? And has he given up? Has he packed it in? Because we've seen that Musselman right now at Arkansas doesn't feel like he'll stay there.
Tennessee got both this week at the same time, back to back. It was pretty nice. A combined win by like 97 between the two.
And now Missouri. So who set up this scheduling? But
I don't know about Missouri tonight. I mean, still, it's like 11.5 opening. Missouri, but they banged Tennessee around both times last year. So until I see it, I look, Tennessee should win. But look, I'm not penciling that in just yet.
in basketball right now, Chase, as you know, is just so volatile. You can, like Missouri. Missouri's a good example. Last year, first-year coach with Dennis Gates, he brought in a lot of transfers from Cleveland State, and they were good. They had a great style of play, and now I think, is he at risk of losing his job? I don't know that they make a move, but it'd be hard to argue, him retaining his job. He's 0-11.
Well, their AD's now out, going to Arizona.
Exactly. So new AD, that doesn't help him. I don't think. She's kind of running away from the hire she made. But that's an example. Exactly. That's a perfect example of what we're looking at here with Vanderbilt. As bad as they are this year, all it takes is 2, maybe 3 players to quickly change that. It takes a good coach as well. You've heard a lot of rumblings about Chris Mack. I think Vandy fans like Bucky McMillan from Samford. Alan Huss at High Point is a guy that they really like. But no, to kind of circle back, I don't think there's really anything, like, even if they do beat Georgia tomorrow, and if they find a way to win one down the stretch, I think it's kind of like Ole Miss last year with Kermit Davis. They were kind of in the mindset of, okay, we're moving on really no matter what.
Yeah, I can see that. But this is like another thing that I'm really curious about, because you're really plugged in. And this is something from fans on the outside, or just SEC fans, that they don't understand, where you're seeing some stuff from inside the program, covering the program. My question is, because everyone wants to jump to the next guy, right? Like there's some, Bud Elliott talks about this, where sometimes you just have to fire, like, even a guy who's maximized his potential and it's really not his fault. Like you just have to do a change to, like, get the fan base acclimated, like believing again. Like, even if he's done the best job possible and shouldn't lose his job, you have to change faces just to keep excitement of, like, oh, the next guy can get us over the hump. And it's just hard to be mediocre for 10 to 12 years, even if that's a really good job to keep things mediocre given the circumstances that coach is just placed in. My wonder here, like, yeah, Chris Mack, whoever they get to replace Stackhouse, is interesting, but is there more to why Vanderbilt is struggling? Is there an NIL issue? Is there a portal, the way that they're attacking the portal issue? Is there a recruiting foundational issue? Disconnect between the administration and the basketball staff? Like, we know baseball juggernaut, like, we know that's not going anywhere, but basketball, I'm more curious about, is everybody on the same page? Does that make sense? Like, from your vantage point, where is that at?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think there's some validity to it. And Stackhouse actually brought up some of his concerns with, the lack of attractiveness, to transfers. He just said, basically, after the Ole Miss loss, which I don't think this was 100% true, but I think there was some truth to it. I don't know if you saw it. He said, we don't get junior and senior transfers. He said, we don't get junior and senior transfers at Vanderbilt. It was kind of funny because there is some truth to that. Vanderbilt's, obviously, we know about their academic standards. They're similar to Michigan, and obviously a lot of, Duke, and obviously all the Ivy League schools. It's just hard. It's hard to transfer those credits. But that has always been the case. That's something that, Kevin Stallings had to deal with. Bryce Drew, who, was able to take his first team to the tournament. Every coach, Clark Lee, they have to deal with that. I think that, yes, there's validity to it, but that's always been the case. So I don't know that is I don't know that that's a hindrance right now. You're going to have to work through it. The women's basketball coach, Shea Ralph, has gotten junior and senior transfers. In Stackhouse, Ezra Magnon was was actually a senior transfer. So it was just funny hearing him say that. He's made so many of those type of excuses. He's made excuses about COVID and things like that. But your point still stands, and I think the bigger question is NIL. In today's day and age, you look at a school like Tennessee. Tennessee is one of the model programs in NIL. Their fan base is massive. And I think Tennessee is a good example of quantity because, and you look at quantity and quality in the NIL world. Maybe a good example of quality is a school like an SMU who has really done well because they've got, they're a private school in a big city, and they've been really smart with it. I think they've got a really good AD, and they may not have the quantity of donors that a Tennessee or an LSU or Ole Miss has, but they've got maybe 10 or 15 that have a lot, that are billionaires. And I think you can say the same thing about Vanderbilt. But right now with Stackhouse, they haven't had a reason to really give. They paid Tyron Lawrence 6 figures to come back. And I think some of the other players are making decent money, but I think they've got to find a way to at Vanderbilt. It's going to be hard to pay that one guy like a Tyron Lawrence a ton of money. I think they need to find a way to spread that out because they've got the money. It's just about that coach going to the donor base and saying, look, here's my plan. Here's why this can work. And I'd love for you to support this program. That's what Clark Lee and Barton Simmons went out and did in the offseason because they didn't really do a ton of that. They wanted to be a full-on developmental program, recruit well, develop, their kids. And by year 5, year 6, they've got, all their players intact. But they realized after last year, Tennessee game was a good example of it. They just don't have the dudes. And you have to go out in the portal. It's like not using free agency in the NFL. I'm sure you've talked about. So it's kind of a long answer to say Vanderbilt just has to have the right coach for that to work, because I think it can. And in basketball, we've seen the Tennessee Vanderbilt rivalry in basketball, thriving. We've seen great atmospheres at both arenas. Feels like it's dead right now. And they've got a new facility coming in. So I think yes, it's a hindrance, but it's a hindrance you can get around, as long as you have the right guy. But yeah, I mean, I've heard that a lot. And I think a lot of what you asked is true, but it's not impossible to navigate, which, you just got to have the right coach, I think.
Yeah. And look, we'll see who it is. And Tennessee fans who make fun, I'm like, hey, watch out. Like every school is one coach away from changing the narrative and flipping the script and everything. It's like Chris Mack's a good coach. I mean, Louisville, I'm sure, is like, well, I don't know, like maybe Chris Mack wasn't so bad after all. And it's like Chris Mack would win. Like he's like one of those where it doesn't jump in the excitement meter, I think, for the average fan. But for those who are very plugged into college basketball are just like, oh, the floor's been raised. Like he's winning games. Like he is the floor has been raised to that point where there's no flame out potential. Now, questions about what's the ceiling there? Maybe that's fair, but he's a floor raiser. And maybe that's what Vanderbilt needs for the foreseeable future, is a floor raiser to get you in that steady ground for the next couple of years, or 3 to 5, however long it is.
I agree with that. I agree. It's a great point. I think that is what Vanderbilt needs. They need a stabilizer. I don't think Chris Mack, say they do hire Chris Mack, I don't think he's going to be asked to make the tournament year 1.
Yeah.
But I think he is going to be asked to at least, be competitive consistently, against SEC competition. And, kind of a piece here for you. His daughter is the first volleyball commit at Vanderbilt. So she's going to Vanderbilt. Yeah. And I've heard he has interest in the job. I've heard he would love to coach at Vanderbilt. I've even heard he's been formulating a staff for whatever that means. I've heard rumors about him and Vanderbilt administration. Again, we don't know what's true and what's not right now. There's so much. I wouldn't feel comfortable saying anything because it's not, that could be totally wrong. It could be totally right, but you just don't know. There's not enough to substantiate it. But I do think Chris Mack is number 1 on a lot of Vanderbilt fans' boards. I think he should be the first call for Vanderbilt. But like I said, you've got Bucky McMillan, Alan Huss, Josh Schertz at Indiana State is another good option. So it's looking like we're going to be in coaching search season again for Vanderbilt basketball.
And I think too, and we can leave it here, Billy, is this is going to be an interesting hire for the AD. Where Corbin, obviously, just however long he wants to do it, like baseball is just fine. You don't really have to get on the road. Clark Lee's now been in there for a little bit. Still TBD, I think, at that point. I will say, like, before they made the Clark Lee hire, I mean, I understood the Wake Forest comparison when that was coming out, like the Dave Clawson comparison and being able to build that in the SEC and that kind of thing. And I'm like, I get the idea with that, but it's easier to do that with a fun offense versus a gritty defense, just because of where football is as a sport. And we saw with Heupel, even losing 30 guys in the portal in year 1, like you just flip the script when you have a good offensive scheme, even if you don't have the talent advantage. For me, I was like, I get that idea, but like I'd rather have Dave Clawson because I just know with his concepts and the mesh stuff and everything else that you're going to be fun. And it's just, I see a quicker path to success on that front. Yeah, go ahead.
No, you finish up.
Well, I was like, part of it is just, I think there's something to when you have questions about NIL, you have questions about the portal and getting your talent rated by the portal every year. You have questions about just your recruiting base, because some schools, like like we give Iowa grief about their offense, this, that, and the other. We give grief about some of these schools in the Big Ten and their offense. I'm like, there was a really good piece in The Athletic about Minnesota, like, and where Minnesota can be with PJ Fleck a couple months ago that I loved. It was a really good long form piece. And it's like, what do you want from them? You look at the state of Minnesota and how many 4-stars they put out. Like, there's only so much you can do and only so much you can build when the state doesn't have the talent necessary. And when you look at Vandy, you're like, okay, you're competing against the big dog, obviously, with Tennessee and NIL and just the base, like the brand, everything else. Like, that's tough. You have people coming in. You have Georgia coming into your recruiting state. You have Alabama. You have Auburn now, who's back. You have LSU. You have Arkansas, like, and the Texas, and obviously that sort of thing. You have to be creative. And I wonder if that also is true when it comes to basketball with this hiring cycle, is like, you have to kind of think outside the box. And can Chris Mack, because he is a veteran coach, think outside the box in terms of how to make Vanderbilt work? Because I think you have to be creative in jobs like this to do it. And the hard-nosed stuff, I'm not certain is enough in today's college sports climate. So yeah, it's great, Chris Mack, you won a lot of games, but the plan, you have to adjust to where you're coming to. And this is, I mean, the toughest job I think you have had as a head coach coming into Vanderbilt. So you have to be a little bit more creative. And that would be the biggest thing to me is in these meetings. And if they do make a change, is the emphasis on creativity with this job and with the football job too.
Yeah, you can't just bang your head against the wall and act like you're Alabama if you're Vanderbilt, right? I do think Tennessee can do that. They've got the money, they've got the tradition, they've got that standing, and they can do that. But Vanderbilt cannot. Duke cannot. Stanford, Northwestern, Wake, even like a Minnesota. A lot of those lower level Big 12, Big 10 schools just can't. So that you have to be creative. And Clark Lee kind of made that shift. He got creative and hired essentially New Mexico State's offensive staff. They brought in Tim Beck, who was their offensive coordinator, an older guy who just knows ball, and I think that was a smart hire for Clark. And then Jerry Kill, who obviously was at Minnesota, and he's going to be kind of the chief consultant for Clark, and I think he needed that. And then Diego Pavia, who won 10 games, Conference USA Player of the Year, stud. I don't know that he's a Power 5 quarterback, but if anything, he can come in and kind of mentor Nate Johnson, a guy who's got 10-3 100-meter speed, and Vanderbilt has kind of reverted back to a couple of years ago with Mike Wright and that style. So like you said, Chase, they're getting creative in football, I think, and I think it'll be better. Again, they got one of the tougher schedules in the country, but it translates to basketball too. You're not going to get the 6'10", bully ball player that Alabama and Tennessee and Kentucky want. You got to get the AJ Ogilvy. If you remember him from Australia, Kevin Stallings did that perfectly. He recruited internationally heavily. Tim Corbin with baseball, he gets guys from California, Maine, Puerto Rico. You have to.
Stanford just got the big kid from Japan where they're going out like that. That's what you got to do.
You have to do it. And, I think Vanderbilt needs a coach that realizes that in basketball. I think Shea Ralph on the women's side has done that. She just picked up a 5-star. Corbin and Clark Lee, I think, are. There's one guy that's not, and it's Jerry Stackhouse. I just think, Vanderbilt can be better, and they know they can be better, and I think they want that, and we'll see. And I'm with you. They got to get creative, and I do think Chris Mack would be a guy that kind of embraces, you're in Nashville, you're in the SEC, but, you've got you can have a home court advantage. You need a guy that embraces that and says, we're not going to hit our bang our heads against the wall. We're going to get creative here and find some shooters, find a 6'10" guy from Australia that is really crafty. That's what you have to do at Vanderbilt. I think you need a coach that knows how to do that.
I agree. Well, Billy, what can the good folks check out from you all across the radio waves and VandySports.com this week?
Yeah, so I guess we'll start with the George Plaster Show. George has been in Nashville radio for over 30 years. We're actually going digitally now. We're on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook Monday through Friday, 2 to 4 p.m. So check us out there. Also available on the podcast feed. And then Vandy Sports, busy week for us. The message boards are flying. And, we've got baseball starting now too, which fans are always locked into. So VandySports.com is the website. And then you can follow me on Twitter at Billy Derrick 10.
There you go. Billy, keep up the great work. Thank you for making the time, and we'll have to check back in again soon.
Let's do it. Thanks, Chase.